Alright, it's time to review a racket that I've never fully meshed with, but I know a lot of people love, the brand new Head Extreme Tour. Oh wait, does that say Pro? Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So yes, Head pulled ahead, another name change. This is not just a heavier version of the Extreme MP the way the Pro used to be. That one's gone. This is the spiritual successor to the Head Extreme Tour, Head's take on a 98 square inch spin racket, which is a style of frame that's been growing a lot in popularity recently. Now I'm going to be honest, I knew this review was coming and I was a little worried. I've tried with the Extreme Tour, I promise, I really have. I've always wanted to like that racket, but it's just never been the one for me. It's not necessarily the racket's fault, but I will go over what I didn't like about the last one while I talk about this new one, because some of the changes they've made have addressed those issues. But of course, before we get into any of that, let me remind you that any of the rackets we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So when the Extreme Tour was first introduced back in 2020, it made a pretty big splash, and that made sense because it was another one of these frames like the V-Core 98, like the Aero 98, formerly the VS, that was a player's frame but with a lot of spin-oriented technology. In theory, that complements the modern player extremely well, and in practice, it certainly worked for a lot of people. I don't think the previous version was quite as popular as the original, but it still maintained a following. So what exactly has changed, other than, of course, the new naming system? Well, you can probably guess it. Auxetic 2.0 replaces Auxetic 1.0. I've checked everything else. The arrow shape is identical. There's still spin pattern branding and my personal favorite sound grommets. And I've taken a long hard look at the grommets themselves, and they are identical to the previous ones. They're quite open at the 12, 6, 9, and 3 o'clock positions, which is common on a spin racket, and I am happy that they've kept it consistent like that since the first generation. So Auxetic 2.0 is the big technological change, and that's how Head has been updating their rackets for the past several years, so it's not too surprising, but there have been some small tweaks in terms of specs as well. It's still a 98 square inch racket with a 16 by 19 string pattern, an undulating 22, 23, and 21 millimeter beam, but there has been a sizable boost in swing weight. The previous one came in swinging at 315 stock. This one's at 325. They've also stiffened it up by about 1 point, which is honestly pretty insignificant, and if anything, Auxetic 2.0 makes it feel softer, or at least not any stiffer. I also just want to give a quick shout out to Head's design team because this thing actually looks really nice. It's a welcome change coming from the Speed MP's paint job, but I also have to say it looks way better in person. When I took it out of the box, I thought the colors popped really well, the black accents are nice. I'm not usually the biggest fan of bright rackets, but this is how to do it right. They also didn't use that velvety paint they used on the Speed. I prefer not to say anything about that one, but let's just say I'm happy it's not on this racket. But anyways, now let's talk about how it feels compared to the previous one. To be honest, I was very excited when I got my hands on this new Extreme Pro. Auxetic 2.0 has been successful for Head, in large part because it helps with stability and ball pocketing, which were the main issues I had with the previous one. I always thought the Extreme Tours were too unstable, that their sweet spots were a bit too punishing, and that they were also quite string sensitive if you wanted to get any sort of feel during ball pocketing. So I had to customize them pretty significantly to get that stability and ball feel. I think I had the last Extreme Tour up at around a 330 swing weight with a leather grip and even more lead in the throat. Even with that though, I still found it a little bit jarring, so I was never able to develop full trust in the racket that it would stay solid and consistent on contact. Now I won't lie, this new one still isn't going to be at the top of my favorite rackets list, but Auxetic 2.0 has significantly improved some of those issues I had. To me, this is the most successful implementation of this technology so far. Right away you feel that better stability. It basically expands the sweet spot and makes the whole frame flex in a more uniform way. Part of that disconnected feel came because I always found the hoop to be a little too rigid compared to how flexible the throat was. Now it really feels as though the whole frame pockets the ball as one cohesive unit. It's still not a super traditional feeling racket. This design will always have somewhat of an awkward rigidity to it when you're not hitting with spin, but at least now I'm not thinking add weight, add weight, add weight the whole time I'm playing with it. Of course, the fact that they've increased the stock swing weight also contributes to that more solid and stable feel, and I do think this is a more appropriate target swing weight than 315 was. Now there are a couple things to note if that all sounds too too perfect, this increase in swing weight is not insignificant and does change the way this racket feels swinging through the air. And also, Auxetic 2.0 does change up the feel quite a bit. I'll elaborate on that heftier swing weight in the spin section, but in terms of feel, this isn't all that traditional, which shouldn't be too surprising considering the racket's profile, and I'm going to try to explain it as I always do. Auxetic 2.0 has given it this sort of muted, almost chalky feel. The best way I can describe it is that it's almost like when you take a bite out of a Malteser for Canadians, or those Whopper chocolates if you're American. I'm unfortunately not familiar with my Whopper and Malteser alternatives for other countries. Sorry. Now I know that's a super random way of describing it, but also please don't go thinking it's too overbearing. Each one of these stabilization technologies has its own quirks in terms of how they affect feel. This is still one of the better ones in terms of maintaining connection to the ball, especially when you compare it to something like vibration dampening mesh, so please don't worry too much. It's also helped to make it even more comfortable than it was previously, despite it being technically stiffer. I didn't personally have any issues with the last Extreme Tour. In fact, I actually thought it was quite comfortable for a modern spin racket, but this one's even better. Spin is the Extreme Pro's bread and butter, and that's part of the reason why I think I've struggled with this design in the past. It's made to be hit with spin, it responds best when hit with spin, and I just don't have the most spin-friendly style. The problems I've had are problems for me, but the reason so many people love this racket is that those issues kind of vanish when you hit with proper spinny technique, not the more flat, penetrative style that I have. Now, like I said, I always try to adapt my game to the racket, and when I did go more Western and tried to brush up a lot more, that's where the racket really came into its own. The whole frame gets more plush, more forgiving, and there's this sort of feedback telling you this is the way you should hit your shots. Western grip, racket face parallel to the ground, and brushing up a ton. This is also when you start tapping into that spin technology, especially those open spin grommets that allow for a lot of string snapback. Once you get all those things working in unison, this racket helps you produce a lot of RPMs onto your ball. It's up there with rackets like the Aero 98 and the VCore 98. I didn't notice a noticeable increase or decrease in spin coming from the previous one, but I do think it's a little bit easier to get dialed into the spin game because it is more forgiving. One thing that is worth noting is that the increase in stock swing weight does make it a little bit tougher to brush up on the ball. This wasn't really an issue for me since I was already playing with the last one customized up to an even higher swing weight than this, but for those of you who were able to play with that one stock, it's something you should take into account. It's similar to what Head did with the Speed MP this year. I think most people will appreciate that boost in swing weight, but it does make the racket feel a touch more sluggish, at least in stock form. Still, because this is more of a high intermediate advanced player's racket, you should be able to handle a 325 swing weight anyway, and that's just going to mean that if you swing it at the same speed, there's more spin potential because there's more mass behind the ball. And of course, remember that this racket does have an aerodynamic design, so it may have gotten a little slower, but it still accelerates quicker through contact than average, at least when you're swinging it with the racket face parallel to the ground. Now, how about control? Well, there's two ways of looking at control on the Extreme Pro. Flat control and control when you're hitting with spin. You probably already know what I'm going to say about its flat control. It's not the best. It's kind of to be expected with spin rackets like this because of their open string bed, open grommets, and even the way they flex. All of that can sometimes lead to a slightly wild launch. That is still one of my issues on this racket, but again, it has gotten pretty significantly better than on the previous versions. Those to me were pure spin rackets, and this one, because the sweet spot has gotten more forgiving and the whole frame flexes more cohesively, it responds quite a bit better to flat hitting. Still, if you do play a predominantly flat style, I would probably look at something else. You'll definitely feel the ball fly on you a little bit, and that's okay. That's just not what this racket's meant to do. Control when hitting with spin is a whole different story, and it's an extremely important characteristic for modern players who have proper spin technique, but also want to hit out with confidence. You look at guys like Sinner and Alcaraz, and obviously what sticks out in their game is power and spin, but they're only able to let loose like that because they feel confident that the ball is going to go where they tell it to. That's what these players' spin rackets are supposed to do. They amplify spin for players who like that response from their frame, but they also don't have that same sloppiness we often associate with 100 square inch spin rackets. Those 2 square inches, the thinner beam, they're crucial in making the hit zone and the potential spray zone much more compact than what you get on those 100s. Now, I know I said the sweet spot has gotten bigger with Auxetic 2.0, which some of you might associate with more sloppiness, but I really wouldn't think of it that way. It's more so bigger in a way where it's more forgiving around the edges, but when you do catch it right, you still get that really nice thwack of of feedback the way you want on a player's racket. Now, I do wish there wasn't such a clear difference in the quality of ball you can produce on a spin shot versus a flat shot. Again, I do think it has gotten better, but comparing it to something like the Aero 98, I do think that racket has better variety. I feel quite a bit more confident pressing on the gas without adding tons of spin on that racket. It could be a skill issue or at least a user issue, but I do think the Aero 98 has a bit more to offer when it comes to precision on any type of shot. Precision, by the way, not necessarily control. None of these rackets really have that guidey type of control. I'll also probably do a more detailed comparison of these two rackets in the near future, so let me know in the comments if that's something that would interest you. Overall though, I'm glad it's become a more consistent racket, and either way, players looking at the Extreme Pro aren't really looking for a racket that's a laser beam in the flat game, so its control is more than enough for the racket that it's supposed to be. Power is another really interesting characteristic on the Extreme Pro because obviously it has a more rigid flex than what most people associate with 98 square inch rackets, which does make it more inherently powerful. This ties into what I was saying earlier about its more wild launch. This definitely pushes the ball deeper with less effort than something like a Blade, a Percept, or any other racket with a constant thin beam. But you do have to keep in mind that this also produces a lot more spin, so you generally want your spin rackets to hit with a bit more power, otherwise your ball won't go deep enough. It is less inherently powerful than 100 square inch spin rackets, so you do still have to bring a lot of that power yourself, which is something I struggled with a bit. Because I had to alter my game to be more spinny and less penetrative, I didn't feel like I was getting the oomph I usually do to push my opponents deep. Spin production wasn't a problem, but then the ball was falling a little bit short, but also keep in mind that I never felt totally free and confident when I was hitting with this. The point of these players' spin rackets is that they allow really good players to hit out more than with a 100 square inch racket, and if you feel that confidence here, you absolutely can hit a powerful ball, especially with this updated version. Thanks to the higher swing weight and the more uniform flex, when you do get a good hold of it, you will hit big. I actually really enjoyed that on my backhand because it gave me more free depth than most 98s, and that increase in stability made me feel so much more confident. It almost felt like the racket was actually helping me out. I do think it's a slight notch under the pure Aero 98 in terms of top end power, but this is also a significantly more comfortable racket, especially with Auxetic 2.0, so that's a trade-off I'm sure a lot of players will be more than happy to make. So look, I think I've made it pretty obvious that this isn't going to be the racket for me. I'm not hiding the fact that I don't love every single racket that I play test, but I do think this is a significant improvement on the previous one, and I should also probably start a significant counter here. Pretty insignificant, pretty significantly, has significantly improved, is not insignificant, pretty significantly, a significantly more, a significant improvement on the previous one. I think it works much better as a whole package, starting with the way it pockets the ball, and that ends up having a positive effect on its consistency, user-friendliness, and control, and that boost in swing weight also helps with power and spin. If you like the previous Extreme Tours, then you will definitely like this one. The only thing I'd be a little bit careful with is that feel, because it is a little bit more muted, but it doesn't ruin the racket in any way whatsoever. This is the type of racket that's made for aggressive, big spin players who want to be able to press on the gas with spin, but also without worrying that the ball is going to fly on them the way it can with 100 square inch spin rackets. They've taken the right steps to make it a racket with more variety. I still think there's room for improvement there, but it is nice that Auxetic 2.0 has helped in that way. I also want to say, as successful as Auxetic 2.0 has been, I know not everybody loves it, but this is the type of frame where it makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's a bit intrusive on pure ball feel, but you won't get that anyway with an aerodynamic undulating beam, so if it can stabilize it and make it more plush, that's definitely a good thing, and that's what it does here. With that said, that is going to be the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you want to demo the Extreme Pro, you can come visit us in store, or if you want to buy it, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.